This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Love's gonna live here. Love's gonna live here. Love's gonna live here again. No more loneliness, only happiness. Love's gonna
You can sing a song on the way home from school and skip around, but you can never overcome the fact that we live in a lamentable world and there is loss. Silence can be a refuge, and silence can be a phenomenally difficult, ambiguous reality. In the early 60s, there was a lot of chaos building. We were uncertain about so many things. JFK, of course, had been assassinated.
Legal representation, these police officers have not allowed me to have any. I don't know what this is all about. I'm just a patsy. President. He's been shot.
Little did we know that ahead of us lay more assassinations.
Well, I don't know what will happen now.
Good evening.
We've got
Dr. Martin Luther King.
There's a dreamlike character to it.
Movement.
Thank all of you
Shot
who
to
made
death
this
in
possible.
Memphis.
Get the gun! Get the gun! Get the gun!
I remember the sensibility of the time. After JFK's assassination,
Officials said the snipers, some believed not to be doing.
many of us had visions. They were not pleasant visions.
Well, I don't know what will happen now.
Emergency food centers are set up to supply milk, besieged and
Many of us were dreaming the dream, what is happening in this country? In the midst of all that comes Simon and Garfunkel. I think of these lyrics and this simple approach as prophetic and elegiac. So this song sort of fell right into the middle of that for me. And it's that combination of the prophetic and the images of silence that are permeating this lyric. And coming in the midst of a time where we were filled with activity and filled with a lot of noise and filled with coming chaos, that notion of silence being a friend and yet the ambiguity of silence all the way through makes it stay with us, makes the lyrics go deep with us. And if you listen to the lyrics, you hear these images of silence coming through in various ways. I mean, you've got the silent raindrops on the one side, you've got wells of silence. So silence as refuge, silence as friend, silence as speaking of the fact that people talk a lot and don't listen. In fact, there's a great melancholy in that whole album that came out 2 years later. The first recording was in '64. And then, of course, Dylan's studio bumped it up with bass and electric guitar and drums and so on. It made it bigger.
I walked along narrow streets of cobblestone.
And I think as we went through the 60s and on into the 70s, though the time passed for singing in this particular way and their particular style, this thing stayed because I think there was an unexpressed melancholy that existed underneath all the rage and all the chaos.
And in the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more. People talking without speaking.
Even now, years and years later, I keep coming back to that original as a refuge. Now silence means so much more to me than it did then. I mean, there is the silence that comes after death and after chaos, but there's the silence of the interior life that I think they were also talking about. And of course, as a person who thinks about theology and religion, I can't help but hear some themes from Scripture in there, even though they may not have been intentional about it. I think of the prophet Isaiah, hear and do not hear, see and do not see. I'm reminded of the Psalms here too. What's lamentable in a time where, certainly in religious circles, I'll speak only of Christian circles, where ultra-bright Christianity reigns, everything is fine, What you need to do is learn lament again. In my case, it's been with the Benedictines, where praying the Psalms daily, morning, noon, and night, over a long period, reacquaints you with the fact that these are metaphors you not only hear, or sing or speak, you start living into the metaphors. And then you start tasting them, and they become like gestures. If you listen carefully enough to a good singer-songwriter, like Paul Simon and like the Simon and Garfunkel things, you start living into those images. They become part of your repertoire of seeing the world, understanding yourself.
And the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence. In restless dreams
The other thing for me is a musical side. I mean, here you had two voices in an odd way having a musical dialogue about silence. Also kind of adds to the depth of this thing. My own daughter, who's a singer-songwriter, was listening to that in very formative years. John Denver on the one side, Joni Mitchell and her long narratives and ways of working words in, and then back to Simon and Garfunkel. So it means a lot to me personally, because I think I've lived with an evolution of a musician in my own household, and lived with the deepening sense of my indebtedness to what they had to say to us way back. Now, nearly 50 years ago. I never tire of listening to it. The thing I think about Paul Simon is that we can't hold him captive in the 60s, especially in the early 60s or mid-60s. He began to mature, the lyrics began to get even more complex and so on. In a way, there's a certain naivete about this that appeals to us still. So I think Simon grew as our sense of the complexity of the times grew and deepened. I really think we're indebted to Paul Simon, among others, but certainly to the range of his trajectory here. You can sing a song on the way home from school and skip around, but you can never overcome the fact that we live in a lamentable world and there is loss. Silence can be a refuge, and silence can be a phenomenally difficult, ambiguous reality.
tenement halls whispered the sounds of silence.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.